What if aging isn't the closing of life, but the soft unfolding of truth? They told us growing older meant losing things: strength, time, opportunities. But what if it's not about losing? What if it's about finally being free? Free from pretending, free from chasing, free from carrying what no longer needs to be held. In this episode, we walk together through the later years of life, not as a decline, but as a return to simplicity, to presence, to peace. You'll hear Buddhist insights on aging, gentle reflections on letting go of control, and stories about elders who discovered something profound, not despite their age, but because of it. If you've ever felt left behind by the speed of the world, or unsure how to grow old with grace, this space is for you. Subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings, and let's walk the softer path together. Not backwards, not forward, but inward. Part 1, the mirror changes, but you are still here. I didn't recognize the face, but the one looking out from behind the eyes, that was still me. One morning, you stand in front of the mirror, not with rush, not to comb your hair or fix your collar, but just to look. And the face looking back feels unfamiliar. The lines are deeper, the eyes softer, the skin thinner. Time has made its marks, slowly, like a river shaping stone. You stare a little longer, and a quiet voice inside says, "When did I change so much?" But another voice answers, a bit deeper, a bit stiller, "I haven't." You see, the mirror tells the story of the body, but not the soul. The soul doesn't wrinkle. It doesn't forget who it is. It doesn't grow old. It just becomes quieter, more spacious, more real. Buddhist teachings remind us that the body is impermanent, a vessel, a cloud, a passing form. But the one who is aware of the changing, the witness inside the change, that is where your peace lies. That is what doesn't age. There's a beautiful meditation taught in the Thai forest tradition. To sit quietly, close your eyes, and simply ask, who is the one aware of this breath? Who sees this thought arise and pass? Who watches the body age without becoming it? And if you sit long enough, not rushing for an answer, you might hear something that sounds not like words, but like truth. I am the one who has always been here. The mirror changes. Your roles change. Your name may be softer on fewer lips, but the light behind your eyes is still steady, still clear, still whole. So today, when you pass by the mirror, pause, not to fix, but to see. To remember that aging is only a change in the reflection, not in the one who reflects. To remember that you're not disappearing, you're revealing. And the most beautiful part of you has never needed smooth skin or youthful eyes. It only needed your presence. Part 2, when the body slows down, the heart awakens. I used to walk fast. Now I walk slower. But for the first time in my life, I see the flowers. There's something strange that happens in the later chapters of life. The very things we once called inconvenience start becoming invitations. The ache in your knees, the morning stiffness, the slowness of rising, the carefulness of sitting, the forgotten name you almost remembered. Years ago, these might have felt like problems to solve. Now, they feel like bells ringing, soft ones, like the ones in temples, calling you not to fix, but to listen. Fallen leaf, once your body ran. Now it walks with you. When you were younger, life was fast. Not just the body, but the world. You moved quickly because everyone did. You climbed, planned, reached, pursued, as if every moment was a rung on a ladder, leading somewhere important. But now, you move slower, not because you want to, not because you chose to, but because your body, that loyal, beautiful companion, is finally asking you to slow down and stay a while. And somewhere in that slowness, the world begins to look different. The breeze touches your skin longer. The birds outside your window, you hear them now. You sip tea more slowly and taste it. You don't just eat. You chew, pause, and feel. A quiet reverence for warm food, and a body still willing to receive it. Buddhism teaches that slowness is not weakness. It's awareness. The Buddha himself walked slowly. When he taught walking meditation, he didn't rush from tree to tree. He walked as if every step mattered, as if the earth beneath him was sacred. And in your own quiet way, so do you now. You may not have called it meditation, but when you hold the railing to steady yourself, when you take an extra breath before stepping out of bed, when you pause mid-conversation to find your words, you are practicing a kind of embodied presence. Most people spend years trying to cultivate the paradox of aging: less movement, more depth. There was a man. His name was Hiroshi, 84 years old. He used to run marathons, but now every morning he simply walks the length of his garden. Slowly, 3 steps, pause. 3 more, pause again. One day his grandson asked, "Grandpa, aren't you bored just walking back and forth?" Hiroshi smiled, looked at the boy and said, "When I was young, I ran to get somewhere. Now that I'm older, I realize everything I ever needed was here the whole time. The wind, the trees, my breath. I don't walk to move. I walk to arrive." That's what aging offers us. The gift of arriving, not just somewhere, but into ourselves. Deciduous tree, a different kind of strength. You might not lift the same. You might not stretch like before. You may even feel embarrassed, asking for help to open a jar or rise from a chair. But what if this isn't weakness? What if this is the beginning of a different kind of strength? The kind that doesn't come from your muscles, but from your presence. The strength to listen, to forgive, to accept help, to let the moment be slow and full. That's not fragility. That's spiritual maturity. That's what monks spend decades cultivating in the forest. And now, your life is offering it freely. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, your body is becoming your meditation teacher. In Buddhism, we are taught to return to the body, the breath, the sensation in the soles of the feet, the rising and falling of the belly. But few people realize you don't need to do anything special to meditate. When your body is already inviting you inward, when walking becomes slow, you notice more. When standing up takes intention, you breathe more. When pain visits your joints, you listen deeper. And in that slowness, you start seeing what's always been true, that nothing needs to be rushed, that no moment is ordinary, that even resting is a prayer. Sheaf of rice, let the body teach you the Dharma. Let your hands tremble a little. Let your knees creak. Let your pace be gentle. Let your rest be holy. You are not falling behind. You are falling into alignment with the truth that the body is a temple and age is the softest bell it rings. So here is a practice just for you. Tomorrow morning, before you stand from bed, place your hands on your chest, feel your breath, and say, not as a complaint, but as a blessing, "Thank you, body. You've brought me this far. Let's go slowly now. Let's go kindly." In the next part, we'll begin to gently explore the quiet grief that often walks with aging. Not just for what's lost, but for what will never be again. But for now, just pause, feel your body, and let your heart whisper, "I don't have to move fast to be alive. I just have to be here." Part 3, the grief of letting go, friendships, roles, identity. I used to be needed. I used to be busy. Now I just sit. And sometimes I wonder if I've disappeared. There is a quiet kind of grief that rarely gets spoken. It doesn't come with flowers. It doesn't show up at funerals. It arrives slowly, soft as dust, and settles into the corners of your days. It is the grief of becoming someone else, or maybe of no longer being who you once were. You see a photo. You remember that younger you, standing tall in uniform, holding a child, signing papers at a desk, laughing with friends on a porch in the afternoon sun. And something in your chest sighs, not from sadness exactly, but from the quiet ache of letting go. There's a name for this in Buddhism, dukkha, not just suffering in the form of pain, but the uneasiness of clinging to what has already passed. Luggage, the roles we wore like armor. For much of our lives, we are known by what we do. She's the teacher. He's the mechanic. She raised 6 children. He ran the temple committee. These weren't just roles. They were identities, a source of belonging, proof that we mattered. But then, retirement comes. Children grow. The phone stops ringing. No one asks for your advice. No one needs your signature. No one remembers your title. And slowly, those names fall away, like leaves from a tree that once stood tall in summer. And you're left asking, if I am no longer that, who am I now? Buddhism doesn't rush to answer that question. Instead, it invites us to sit with it, to feel the grief of those changing names, and to not run from it, because there is wisdom in the mourning, not only for those we've lost, but for the parts of ourselves that no longer rise with us each morning. Fog friendships that faded. Maybe you've lost people, to illness, to distance, to the natural drifting apart of lives that once ran side by side. You remember their laugh, their scent, how they used to sit in that chair, drink tea that certain way, call you by a nickname no one else uses. You carry these memories like folded letters in a drawer, not forgotten but rarely read aloud. And sometimes, you wonder if grief has an expiration date, if you're still allowed to miss them. After all these years, let me offer this. In Buddhist practice, grief is not something to get over. It is something to walk with, like a companion, like a shadow that teaches us where the light used to shine. Whatever is loved will one day be lost. The Buddha reminded us, but he didn't say it to frighten us. He said it to help us cherish what remains. There is a story told in the Zen tradition of an old man whose best friend passed away. He still set a cup of tea for him each morning, still talked to him softly under his breath. Someone once asked, "Do you know he can't hear you?" The man smiled and said, "Maybe he can't, but I can. And I still need to say thank you." Person in Lotus position, medium skin tone, the grief of invisibility. There is another grief, more subtle, not about someone else, but about being forgotten yourself. You walk into a room, and no one turns. You say something wise, and they nod politely, then scroll their phones. The world feels younger, faster, like it's rushing past you, as if you're no longer the center of it. And the ache isn't that you're gone, but that you're still here, and no one seems to see you anymore. In the Dhammapada, there is a line that says, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." But it takes time to grow that solid inside, to feel at peace even when the world forgets to clap for you. It takes letting go of the desire to be recognized and learning to simply be, not because you're invisible, but because your value now doesn't come from outside. It radiates from within. Sheaf of rice, letting go is not forgetting. It is honoring through release. You are not being asked to forget your friendships, your work, your name. You are only being asked to let go of needing those things to prove that you are worthy. You are worthy because you are here, breathing, listening, loving still. There's a practice in Buddhist psychology called mudita, sympathetic joy. Teaches us to rejoice in the lives of others without needing to compare. It reminds us, I don't need to be who I was to be whole now. Candle, a quiet practice for grieving and gratitude. If you're willing, try this simple ritual. One evening, sit in a quiet room, light a candle, place in front of you a small object, a photo, a pen, a piece of cloth, from someone or something you've lost. Place your hand on your heart and say, "Thank you for the life we lived, for the name I once wore, for the love I still carry. I release the needing, but I keep the memory. I am not who I was, but I am not less." And then just breathe. Let your tears rise if they must. Let silence sit beside you like a friend, and trust that this, too, is the path. In the next part, we'll gently explore a topic many elders struggle to voice, the fear of being a burden. But for now, just hold this truth. You may have lost names, but you have gained depth. You may have shed roles, but you have found stillness. You are not less. You are simply becoming who you were underneath it all. Part 4. You are not a burden, Buddhism and worth in old age. I may not move as fast, but I am still the same light. She sat by the window, watching the wind play with the curtains. The house was quieter these days. Too quiet. Her daughter had gone back to the city. The grandchildren only visited on Sundays now. She didn't want to disturb them too often. Didn't want to call unless it was important. And so she sat, not because she had nothing to say, but because she didn't want to be a burden. This is the word many older people carry like an invisible weight. Burden. A soft ache beneath their politeness. A silence between the lines of their conversations. A holding back of emotions, needs, even joy, for fear of being too much. But let me say something clearly, gently, and without hesitation. You are not a burden. You are a blessing that has simply become quieter. The illusion of usefulness. In modern society, our value is often tied to what we can produce, how fast we work, how much we earn, how many people rely on us. But as age sets in, those things begin to fade. You don't drive as much. You don't cook for 10 anymore. You forget where you left your glasses or the name of a street. You ask for help, sometimes often, and the thought creeps in, they'd be better off without me slowing them down. But here's what Buddhism teaches us. Worth is not earned. It is inherent. It exists because you exist. Just as a candle still gives light even as it melts, you still give presence, even if you no longer do it in the same ways. The Buddha and the elder monk. There's a story in the Buddhist Vinaya, the early monastic code. An old monk had become sick, too weak to clean himself, too frail to walk. He lay alone, uncared for, soiled and ashamed. When the Buddha heard of this, he personally went to the elder monk, bathed him with his own hands, cleaned his robes, and sat beside him. Then he gathered the other monks and said, "Monks, you have no mother and father to care for you. If you do not care for one another, who will care for you?" And then softly, "Whoever would serve me should serve the sick." There was no talk of being a burden, only the reminder that love is a circle, and when it returns to you in the form of help, you are not failing. You are allowing someone else to practice compassion through you. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, receiving is also a gift. In the West, we're often uncomfortable with receiving. We want to pay back. We want to be independent. We want to be the helper, never the helped. But the truth is, when you allow someone to assist you, to support you, to be there when you cannot be there for yourself, you give them a gift. You allow them to grow in patience, in love, in empathy, in presence. That is not burden. That is a sacred exchange. Cherry Blossom, a meditation for self-worth. If this resonates with you, try this gentle meditation. Sit comfortably. Let your hands rest softly in your lap. Close your eyes and breathe. As you inhale, say silently, "I am still worthy." As you exhale, "Even as I change." Again, "I am not a burden. I am a living teaching." Let these words wash over you, like warm sun on an early spring day. Let them seep into the places you've kept silent, the places that shrink when you need help, the places that still feel unsure if you matter. You do. Candle, you are presence, not productivity. There is something about being older that gives you a special presence. Even if you don't speak much, even if you're forgetful, even if you feel like a side character in your own home, you carry time inside you, lived experience, history, lessons written in the lines around your eyes. You're not a machine. You're a living library. When you sit at the table, even in silence, you are anchoring the room. Your stillness teaches others how to slow down. Your stories remind others what matters. Your vulnerability reminds others to soften. Deciduous tree, a reflection. The old tree in the courtyard. In a small temple in Kyoto, there's a tree that's nearly 800 years old. It no longer blossoms like it used to. Its trunk is twisted. Some branches are bare. It leans slightly to one side, held up by wooden beams. But every morning, monks bow to it, not because it is useful, not because it's productive, but because it is sacred. It has witnessed time. So have you, and for that, you are revered. Even if the world forgets to bow, even if no one thanks you today, know this: the earth still holds you with reverence. The Dharma still flows through your breath, and your presence is still holy. In the next part, we'll explore how, as the noise of life fades, a deeper kind of silence begins to bloom, and how that silence is not emptiness, but awakening. But for now, pause, breathe, and place your hand gently over your heart. Whisper, "I am not a burden. I am a blessing becoming quieter." Part 5: Silence becomes golden. Rediscovering stillness in later life. I used to fill the silence. Now I sit with it and hear something deeper than words. There was a time in your life when silence felt uncomfortable. Moments between conversations. Long afternoons with nothing to do. The sound of the refrigerator hum at night. It all felt empty, lonely, like something was missing. So you filled it with music, with television, with tasks, with talk, because that's what the world taught you. Silence means nothing is happening, and nothing feels like failure. But slowly, as the years pass, as the world quiets around you, as the children grow, the job retires, the obligations fade, something changes. The silence comes back, but this time feels different. Crescent moon, the sacred return of silence. You sit on the porch, and for the first time you notice the sound of the wind in the leaves. You wake in the morning, and instead of turning on the news, you sit quietly with your tea, watching the steam rise like a soft prayer. No one needs anything from you at this hour. No deadlines, no rushing, just stillness. And somewhere in that stillness, you begin to hear something. Not noise, not words, but presence. In Buddhism, silence is not a lack of sound. It is the presence of something deeper. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha is known as the silent sage, not because he never spoke, but because his words came from silence. He once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." And that kind of word, the kind that brings peace, only arises when we learn to sit with the silence, without needing to escape it. Sheaf of rice stillness is not doing nothing. It is doing presence. Many elders struggle with the shift from doing to being. You once measured your days in tasks completed, meals cooked, calls made, people helped. Now the days stretch longer, sometimes quieter than you want. And a voice inside asks, "Am I wasting time?" But Buddhism offers another lens. Stillness is not absence. It is intimacy with life. It is only when the mind becomes still that the heart can begin to speak. A Zen story. The monk who swept silence. There was once a young monk who could never sit still. During meditation, he fidgeted. He worried. He thought of errands, memories, future plans. Finally, the old master gave him a broom and said, "Sweep the courtyard until your mind becomes quiet." The boy swept all morning. Still no silence. He asked, "Master, it's not working." The master smiled. "Then sweep with the silence itself." The next morning, the boy didn't sweep with effort. He swept with awareness. He listened to the bristles, the wind, the birds, the rhythm of his breath. And in that moment, he wasn't sweeping anymore. He was being. And the silence finally arrived. Not as an absence, but as a homecoming. Blossomed the fear of silence and the gift inside it. It's okay if you've been afraid of the quiet. Sometimes silence brings up things you've pushed away. Grief, regrets, questions with no answers. But if you can sit with them, breathe through them, not fix, not escape, just be with them, you'll discover what many Buddhist masters discovered. Silence is the doorway to compassion. Not the kind you give others, but the kind you give yourself. The moment you stop running from silence, it begins to hold you. A practice of presence. Listening beyond sound. Try this tomorrow morning. When you wake, before reaching for your phone, sit by the window, close your eyes, take 3 gentle breaths, and then listen. not just for noise, but for the space between sounds, the pause between birdsong, the hush before the kettle sings, the gentle nothing that is full of everything. Then whisper to yourself, this silence is not empty. It is full of what I used to miss. When I was busy being busy. Prayer beads, the rhythm of aging is the rhythm of breath. In youth, life moves in punctuation marks, exclamation, deadlines, events. But aging is a return to commas, to spaces, to the long inhale before the next line. This is not slowing down. This is deepening, like a monk ringing the temple bell, not to start something, but to remind everyone they are already here. Sunrise over mountains, elderhood as the final chapter of awakening. What if old age was not the end, but the arrival? What if this silence is the beginning of something sacred? A different kind of voice emerges from inside you, one that doesn't need to be loud, one that doesn't need an audience, just truth, just presence, just you. So when the house grows quiet, when no one calls for hours, when the day stretches on, without events or tasks, don't fill it out of habit. Just sit, just breathe, and listen, because in that space, your soul speaks, not in words, but in knowing. In the next part, we'll walk together through the soft terrain of the past, not to change it, but to learn how to forgive it. But for now, bow your head gently to the quiet around you and say, this silence is not loneliness. It is a companion I finally stopped running from, and it speaks in peace. Part 6, the past is not who you are. Forgiveness in aging. I spent years replaying what I should have done. Then one morning, I whispered, I forgive you, and for the first time in decades, I could breathe. There comes a time in every life when we stop running forward and begin looking back, not because we're stuck, but because the path behind us is long and full and unfinished in our hearts. And as we walk through our later years, the past begins to visit more often. Old conversations, old decisions, old versions of us that still knock at the door. Late at night, you sit in your favorite chair, a soft afternoon sun resting on your skin, and you remember the friend you hurt with words said too quickly, the opportunity you missed out of fear, the child you wish you'd held more, the argument you never apologized for, the secret you never told anyone. And a voice inside whispers, I should have known better. But here's the gentle truth the Buddha would offer. You only could have known then what you know now, and that's not a failure. That's being human. Memory is not punishment. It's invitation. Many people fear looking back. They say things like, it's too late now. What's done is done. The past is the past. But Buddhist practice teaches that we don't look back to relive. We look back to release, to see clearly, to hold with compassion, to set free. There's a story in the Theravada tradition of a monk who could not find peace in meditation. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of a man he once harmed in anger. He went to the Buddha and said, I cannot go forward. The past drags me back. The Buddha replied, then do not go forward. Sit with the past until it no longer binds you. And so the monk did. For months, he breathed with the memory, not judging, not excusing, just being with it, like a friend long misunderstood. And one day, he no longer felt the weight. He saw that version of himself with tears, not of shame, but of forgiveness. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, aging is the time to turn toward, not away. There's a reason these memories return. In our later years, it's not to torture us, it's to free us. Because now, for the first time, you have the space, the wisdom, the tenderness, to sit with what younger you couldn't face. You don't have to justify anything. You don't have to be proud of it. You just have to look at your younger self and whisper, you were doing your best, and I understand now. Fallen leaf, you are not your past. You are the one who grew from it. Buddhism teaches that the self is not fixed. There is no you frozen in time. Not the teenager who was reckless, Not the parent who yelled too much. Not the spouse who didn't know how to love well. Not the worker who chose safety over passion. All of them were visitors, temporary forms, clouds passing through your sky. Who you are now, this person with soft eyes and quiet steps, is not their shadow. You are the result of the learning. You are the garden that grew from their soil. You are not broken. You are blossoming. Still, even now, cherry blossom, a practice of compassionate looking. Try this gentle reflection. Sit in a quiet space, take a few breaths, and bring to mind a younger version of yourself. Any age, any memory that still brings tension. Imagine them sitting in front of you. Don't correct them. Don't change what happened. Just say this silently. I see you. I know you were scared. I know you were trying. I forgive you. Place your hand on your chest. Breathe. Then say, I don't need to punish you anymore. I only need to understand. And if tears come, let them. They are not regret. They are release. They are your soul finally being allowed to rest. Dove, forgiveness is not forgetting. It's no longer needing to relive it. There are things you won't ever forget. But that doesn't mean you must keep carrying them. The Buddha once told a parable of a man carrying a heavy log across a river. Once across, the man continued to carry the log on his back. People asked him, "Why are you still holding it?" He said, "It helped me cross." And they replied, "Yes, but you're on the other side now." This is forgiveness, letting go of the log, thanking it for getting you here, but no longer mistaking it for who you are. Prayer beads, your past has shaped you, but your breath shapes you now. As we age, memories will rise like mist, sometimes sweet, sometimes heavy, but each time they come, you can choose how to meet them, with judgment or with presence, with clenched fists or open palms, with shame or with soft eyes that have finally seen enough. To offer grace, you are not the worst thing you've done. You are not the voice that hurt someone once. You are not the silence that lasted too long. You are not the path you didn't take. You are the breath that continues, the forgiveness that unfolds, the quiet miracle that you are still here, still learning, still loving. In the next part, we will meet one of the tenderest fears in aging, losing control, and we will explore how the loss of control may actually be the doorway to something softer, and more free than we ever imagined. But for now, sit with yourself a little longer and say, I forgive the version of me who didn't know yet what I know now, and I trust that who I am becoming is enough. Part 7. When you let go of control, life becomes kind again. I used to plan everything. Now I wake up and listen to what life is trying to show me. There's a moment, somewhere in the slow curve of aging, when you realize you're not in control anymore. Not of your time, not of your energy, not of your body, not of what happens around you, not even of your memories. You wake up with a plan. Then your knees ache, your mind drifts, the phone rings, and suddenly you're tired again. And for a while, this feels like defeat. You spent a lifetime being in charge of the house, of your job, of your family, of your calendar. And now, I can't even control how fast I walk. First, it stings. You feel like you're slipping, like life is happening to you instead of with you. And the fear rises. If I let go, will everything fall apart? But here's the beautiful paradox. It doesn't fall apart. It begins to soften, because life isn't asking you to surrender out of punishment. It's inviting you to relax into its rhythm. Dove, the illusion of control. Buddhism teaches us that control is an illusion. You can plant the seed, but you cannot force it to grow. You can care for the body, but you cannot stop it from aging. You can love people fiercely, but you cannot make them stay. What you can do, what you've always been able to do, is choose how to meet what arises, not with force, but with fluidity. There is a Zen saying, let go or be dragged. It sounds harsh at first, but really, it's kind, because trying to control what is uncontrollable is what exhausts us. not the change itself, but our resistance to it. And the moment we stop resisting, even a little, something amazing happens. Life becomes gentler. A story. The Old Woman and the River. There's a story told in the mountain villages of northern Japan. An old woman had spent her whole life gathering water from the river. She had a system. She knew the seasons, the flow, the weight. She carried 2 buckets daily, like clockwork. But in her 80s, her hands began to shake. Her back bent. She spilled. The buckets felt heavier each week. Her children offered help, but she refused. Until one day, she fell. The buckets rolled away. She sat on the riverbank, soaked and humiliated. And then she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in her life, she realized the river will still flow, whether I carry the buckets or not. From that day forward, she let others carry the weight. She sat by the river instead, and she said, "Now, I finally see how beautiful the water is. That's what letting go of control can offer. Not collapse, but clarity. Not powerlessness, but peace." Why life becomes kinder. When we no longer have to be on top of everything, we start to see things differently. You begin to trust others more. You say, "I don't know," without shame. You ask for help and receive it with grace. You start to see how much of life runs on its own. And you realize it always did. You just thought you were steering. But life was always the river. You were always the boat. And now, you're letting the current carry you. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, a meditation on surrender. Find a quiet place. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Place your hands open on your lap. Breathe slowly. On the inhale, say silently, "I release control." On the exhale, "I trust the flow." Do this for a few minutes. Let the thoughts come. Let them go. Let the aches be there. Let the mind wander and return. Each time, come back to the breath, not as a task, but as a kindness. You're not doing it wrong. You're doing what life asks of you now. Less fixing, more flowing. Deciduous tree, trusting others, trusting life. One of the hardest parts of aging is needing others. It feels like losing independence, like becoming small again. But Buddhism teaches that interdependence is not weakness. It is the truth of everything. The tree needs the soil. The bird needs the sky. The moon needs the sun. We all lean on one another. And in that leaning, there is beauty. So when your child offers to help you dress, let them. When your friend offers to drive you, receive it. When your doctor explains slowly, thank them. You are not helpless. You are connected. And that is sacred. Prayer beads, a prayer for surrender. If you ever feel overwhelmed, try whispering this. I don't have to know. I don't have to fix. I don't have to hold everything together. I can let go. I can be held. This is not weakness. This is the deepest form of spiritual maturity. The child clenches. The elder releases. The young force life open. The wise open to life. In the next part, we'll talk about love in older age and how it transforms from something we try to hold on to into something we can simply become. But for now, just sit for a while. Let go of everything you think you're supposed to manage and let life be kind to you again, because it wants to be. It always did. You just had to stop holding the reins so tightly. Part 8, Relationships in Old Age. Loving without possessing. I used to want them to stay. Now I just want them to be free and to know that I love them, even when they're not near. As we grow older, our relationships begin to shift, not because we love less, but because we begin to understand more deeply what love is. In youth, love often meant proximity, closeness, touch, constant words, reassurance, possession. But age has a way of teaching us that the most powerful love is not the kind that clings. It's the kind that watches someone walk away and still feels full. Of the people who have gone, there are people we no longer see. Some because they've passed away. Some because life moved them in a different direction. Some simply drifted. And sometimes, In the quiet of evening, their names rise like clouds in your chest. You remember the sound of their voice, the smell of their clothes, how their presence made a room feel warmer, and your heart aches, not to have them back, but to say, wherever you are, I still love you. Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent, including relationships, and yet the paradox is this: when you stop trying to hold on, the love deepens, because it's no longer based on form, it's based on presence, on being. Shifa writes a story, The Woman Who Loved the Wind. In a quiet village by the sea, there lived an old woman who had once loved a man, who was wild like the waves. He had long since gone, carried by storms, by war, by time. But each evening, she would light a candle by her window and sit in silence, not waiting, not wishing, just loving. When asked why she did this, she said, because love isn't about being together. It's about remembering how to stay open, even when nothing comes back. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, love as presence, not possession. In Buddhism, true love is called matri, loving kindness. It is not I need you. It is may you be happy, even if not with me, even if not in this lifetime, even if you never know I'm still loving you. This is not sadness. This is freedom. To love without needing, to offer without asking. Takes time to arrive here, takes growing old, takes losing, takes grieving. But once you're here, you are no longer afraid of people leaving, because you've realized love is not something you have, it is something you become. Crescent moon relationships now. Softer, slower, more sacred. As we age, we may have fewer relationships, but the ones that remain are often quieter and more real. A friend you don't talk to every day, but whose voice still warms you. A neighbor who brings you soup without needing to say much. A grandchild who hugs you wordlessly. A spouse who sits beside you in silence, both of you knowing that no words are needed anymore. This is love in later life. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. Fallen leaf letting go of how it used to be. There is grief, of course. The way your partner used to remember every detail. The way your child once called every weekend. The way your hands once reached easily for theirs. The laughter that now feels like a memory, more than a presence. But grief does not mean the love is gone. It means it is changing shape, like water becoming mist, like hands becoming prayer. Love does not die, transforms. Prayer beads, a loving kindness meditation for release. Sit quietly. Place one hand on your heart and the other over your belly. Think of someone you've loved and perhaps still long for. Breathe in and say, may you be well. Breathe out, may you be free. Again, may you feel how much I care, even without my voice. Repeat this for anyone you still carry in your heart. And notice, not the emptiness, but the space, the spaciousness of a heart that no longer needs to possess, to feel full. Cherry blossom love in this season of life is no less deep. You might not write love letters. You might not hold hands at every sunset. You might not say, I love you every day. But every time you fold someone's sweater with care, every time you make their favorite dish without being asked, every time you remember their laugh and let yourself smile, that is love. Pure, quiet, and free of grasping. You may have fewer people now, but the space inside you is wider than ever. You don't need to keep people close, to love them well, because the final stage of love is not holding on. It is blessing their path and continuing your own. In the next part, we'll begin to look at what many fear most, the ending of this life, and how Buddhism invites us to see death not as something to dread, but as something to understand, with the softness of a closing flower. But for now, just pause. Think of someone you love, and whisper, you don't need to be near, for my love to reach you, and I don't need to hold you, to know you were never truly gone. Part 9, Death as a Gentle Doorway. Buddhist reflections on the end. I feared death for so long, but when I finally sat with it, It looked a lot like rest. You may not talk about it out loud, not at the dinner table, not with the children, not even with close friends, but in the quiet corners of your thoughts. It visits, not dramatically, not cruelly, just softly. The realization, I am closer to the end than to the beginning. First, it tightens the chest. You think of the things left undone, of the people you'll leave behind, of the question, what happens next? But slowly, if you're willing to sit with it, really sit, without running, without pretending, you begin to feel something unexpected, a kind of stillness, not emptiness, not numbness, but a soft, sacred quiet. Buddhism and the truth of impermanence. The Buddha didn't avoid the topic of death. In fact, he taught it constantly, because death to him was not a problem to solve, but a teacher to listen to. One of his earliest reflections was, all conditioned things are impermanent. They arise and pass away. Understanding this deeply brings peace. And so we don't talk about death in Buddhism to be morbid, but to wake up, because when we truly understand death, we stop clinging to the unnecessary. We love more. We suffer less. We begin to live fully. Candle a story. The man who prepared a cup. There's an old Zen tale of a man who kept an empty teacup on the table beside his bed. Each night, he would touch it gently and say, if I do not wake, let this be the last thing I touched. A reminder that I came to this life empty-handed, and I leave the same. He lived to be 96, and in the last days of his life, he was asked, aren't you afraid? He smiled, not at all. I've been practicing dying. Every night, crescent moon aging is nature's way of preparing us. When we are young, death seems far away, a shadow at the edge of a long road. But with age, something changes. Your body slows, your days stretch, you begin to feel, not fearfully, but honestly, that time is finite, and that realization isn't cruel. It's clarifying. Suddenly, what matters becomes clear. A quiet afternoon with someone you love, the taste of soup made slowly, the sound of a familiar voice, a moment of stillness before sleep. When you stop pretending you'll live forever, you start living like life is sacred again. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, the death meditation, Maranasati. In Buddhism, there is a practice called Maranasati, mindfulness of death. It is not done in fear. It is done in love. To remember that every breath could be the last, and that's what makes it precious. Here's how to practice it. Sit quietly, breathe, place one hand on your heart, and whisper, this life is temporary. This moment is mine. Then think, if I were to die tonight, what would I release? What would I forgive? What would I say? You may cry, you may smile, but you will know one thing for sure. I am alive, and I have not wasted this moment. Sheaf of rice, what happens after? This is the question that arises quietly. What happens when I die? Buddhist teachings vary depending on school, but at their heart they offer this, that death is not the end, that the self you think you are is always changing, that consciousness continues, like a candle lighting another. But more important than what comes next is how you prepare now, because the quality of your death is shaped by the quality of your heart. If you leave in fear, you carry fear. If you leave in peace, you carry peace. So the practice is simple. Make peace moment by moment. Forgive now, love now, rest now. Say what matters. Let go early and often. Prayer beads, your legacy is not what you leave behind. It's how you leave. Asterisk, asterisk. People often ask, will they remember me? Did I do enough? What will I be remembered for? But Buddhism shifts the question. What energy am I releasing into the world? As I take my last breath, let it be gentleness. Let it be forgiveness. Let it be trust. Not in a specific heaven, not in a reward, but in the natural rhythm of this life, where nothing is wasted and all things return. Dove, a final practice. The smile before goodbye. Thich Nhat Hanh. a beloved Vietnamese Zen master, often reminded his students, "The moment of death is like a wave returning to the ocean. There is no death, only transformation." He practiced smiling with each exhale, so that when the last one came, it would carry peace. Try that. Each night before sleep, close your eyes and smile softly. Say, "Thank you for this life. If I wake tomorrow, I will live gently. If I don't, I will return gently." This is not morbid. This is sacred. It is the prayer of those who are no longer afraid. In the final part of this episode, we will come home, not to any place outside, but to the stillness within, to the gentle truth that letting go was never about loss. It was always a path back to yourself. But for now, sit for a moment, place your hands in your lap, feel the rise and fall of breath, and whisper, "When my time comes, I will go with soft eyes and an open heart." Part 10, coming home to yourself, the final letting go. In the end, I didn't go anywhere. I just stopped running. And when I turned around, I had always been here. You've let go of many things. The rush, the roles, the identities, the stories of what could have been, the people you couldn't keep, the control you never really had, even the fear of death itself. But now, there is only one thing left, and it's not a thing to release. It's a place to return to, yourself. Not the version people know, not the name, not the memories, but the silent, witnessing presence that has been here since the beginning, the one who watched it all. Of who are you? Without your story, you are no longer the busy one, no longer the strong one, no longer the one everyone calls first, no longer the child, the parent, the worker, the fixer. And yet, you are still here, sitting, breathing, being. And in this quiet, a question arises. Who am I now? That there's nothing left to prove. In Buddhist meditation, there is a phrase whispered gently, returning to the breath, returning home. Because home, in its deepest sense, is not a place, it's a presence, a state of being where nothing is needed and everything belongs. It is here, in the soft quiet of old age, that many people finally touch that home. Not a house, not a memory, not a destination, but the truth of your own being. Crescent Moon, a story. The monk with no name. In a remote forest monastery, there lived an elderly monk who had forgotten his given name. The other monks simply called him Thay, teacher, but he never responded to it. He just smiled and kept sweeping. One day, a novice asked, "Master, who are you? If you can't remember your name." He paused, touched his chest, and said, "I am the one who sweeps, the one who breathes, the one who sees sunlight through trees." That is enough. We spend much of our lives building a me, but in the end, peace is found not in being someone, but in being here. Person in lotus position, medium skin tone, letting go not out of loss, but out of fullness. This final letting go is not surrender because you have no choice. It is release because you no longer need to carry anything. You no longer need to chase anything. You are whole. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh called dwelling in the present moment as your true home. You don't need more knowledge, more answers, more improvement. Just this breath, just this now, just this stillness. Prayer beads, a final meditation. Coming home. Close your eyes. Place your hands over your heart. Take a breath and whisper, "I have arrived. I am home. There is nowhere to go, nothing to fix. I am already enough." Let your breath settle. Let your thoughts slow and feel what remains when everything else is gone. Not the roles, not the regrets, not the labels, just presence. And in that presence, a peace that does not come from understanding, but from simply being. Cherry blossom, you are not fading. You are becoming transparent. People often talk about old age as if it's disappearing. But what if you're not fading? What if you're just becoming clearer? Like mist revealing the mountain. Like glass letting in the light. Not gone, but bare. Not less, but closer to the essence. And when your time comes, whether in sleep, in prayer, in a quiet room filled with light. You won't be leaving. You'll simply be returning. To where? Not to the earth, not to the sky, not to another lifetime, but to the quiet center you've always carried inside you. So rest now, not because you're giving up, but because you've come back. Back to the breath, back to your body, back to the space between thoughts, back to the one who sees. You are not lost. You are home. Dove, a final whisper. Letting go was never about ending. It was about returning. And you, beloved one, have returned to yourself. The art of aging isn't about holding on longer. It's about holding more gently. You've just walked through 10 soft steps, each one a layer of letting go, of the past, of the body, of old names and long memories, of the fear of not being needed, of the illusion of control, of the people you once clung to, of the question about what comes after. And where did it lead you? Not to an ending, but to a beginning, to the still, steady presence that has always lived within you. Not broken, not fading, but wiser, softer, more real than ever. So if you're watching this now, maybe with a blanket over your knees, or a quiet tear in your eye, know this: you are not running out of time. You are arriving into yourself. Each wrinkle is a prayer. Each pause is a page turned. Each day is a chance to rest in the truth that nothing more needs to be added for you to be whole. Before we go, may I ask you one question? What are you ready to let go of so you can come home to yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Not because you have to, but because someone out there might need to hear what you're ready to release. And if this journey moved you, gently tap subscribe. You don't have to follow alone. Here we walk together, not fast, not far, but inward. This is Lotus Light Teachings, and you are already the light.